Welcome to AARP Alaska's 2010 Video Voter Guide. We're here with Joe Miller, who is running for U.S. Senate. We're going to be talking about Social Security, deficit reduction, Medicare fraud, and access to physicians. First, your opening statement.
Thank you, Ann. My name is Joe Miller. I'm running for U.S. Senate. I'm a concerned father, concerned citizen, proud husband who is very concerned about the state of our nation. I believe that we're in a crisis point, primarily a crisis of leadership. And we see it demonstrated in the financial and the expenditures that are going on right now in government that are going far beyond what our constitutional limits were intended to allow government to have. And I believe that without new leadership, if we continue to re-elect incumbents, that in fact this country is going to, I think, go the way of Greece, which is a situation that is intolerable financially and will lead to, I think, real problems, in fact, crisis for seniors.
Our first question deals with Social Security. Well, Social Security is currently financially strong and has enough revenue to pay 100% of benefits until 2037 and 75% after that. Most agree that's not good enough and changes need to be made to ensure that people can collect on the benefits they've earned. If elected, what changes would you propose to help ensure that Social Security is there for future generations?
Well, I think that really is an optimistic statement regarding Social Security. Social Security, as you know, has a trust fund, or at least is supposed to have a trust fund. And unfortunately, the federal government has raided that trust fund to pay for other obligations. In fact, in April of this year, for the first time, Social Security actually had more outlays than inlays. In other words, the Social Security revenues that come in off of payroll were less than the amount of money being paid out. So we're at a point now today where the trust fund doesn't exist because your elected representatives and senators have spent that money to pay for other programs that, frankly, the government is not authorized to actually do constitutionally. And we're at a point now where basically the payments for Social Security are dependent upon the good faith and credit, essentially, of your government. In other words, if your government continues to be solvent, which right now we're teetering on the brink of insolvency, then those checks will continue to flow. But the answer, I think, to the situation right now is to get the government back to the limited state that it needs to be in. That limited state is provided by the Constitution. Our founders provided for limited constitutional government. There are enumerated powers that are provided to the government, such as defense, such as borders, and other things. Social Security, though, is a contract between you and your government. You've paid into the program. You expect to be paid back for that. We must maintain the faith. We must maintain the contract between government and our seniors. You are the most dependent on those payments. In fact, if those payments were taken from you, you would obviously be in a crisis. My parents, who are volunteering with me on this campaign, are both Social Security recipients. Primarily, that's where their income comes from, is Social Security, health care through Medicare. If, in fact, we were to pull back the benefits the government has because of a crisis financially, the end result of that would be very hard on them, would be very hard on you. So I think we as elected representatives, congressmen, congresswomen, senators, have to work together to bring the country back to where it needs to be, to bring about financial solvency. Because if we don't do that, this country is not going to be able to meet the obligations that it's committed to with our seniors.
Our nation's deficit is threatening our financial security and needs to be reduced. Some have suggested that one way to reduce the deficit would be to cut Social Security benefits. Social Security is financed by workers' contributions and did not cause the deficit. If elected, would you support cutting Social Security to reduce the deficit?
Absolutely not. We are not going to reduce Social Security benefits to the current recipients. We cannot do that. Right now, the federal deficit, I've mentioned that in the last question, but the answer to the last question, is at an unmanageable state. In fact, by some estimates, there was a National Review article just 2 weeks ago that suggested that our national deficit, at least of unfunded obligations, those are obligations in the future that are not yet funded, $130 trillion. That is just an enormous number. I mean, trillion alone is something that's almost incomprehensible. Our absolute actual debt, in other words, the debt that we owe to those that are holding our treasury bills, $13 trillion. Again, a very enormous number. We have so much debt in this country today that we're at the point where our bond rating is almost ready to be reduced by our own bond raters in this country. The Chinese have already reduced our bond rating. The Chinese, other countries that have in the past supported our government with paying for our debt are unwilling now. not as willing as before to pay for that debt because they're concerned about where we're at as a country. Financially, we're upside down. They recognize that. Unless we get a hold of that debt, everybody's at risk. You as a Social Security recipient, you as a Medicare recipient are at significant risk of not getting those payments. So we've got to get that debt under control, but we've got to maintain the contract with our seniors that are most dependent on it. Now, ultimately, there is going to have to be a transition to more of a personalized, privatized system. And there are a couple of good plans that are out there. President Bush suggested several years ago to go into a privatization plan. Congressman Ryan has made a plan as well that may be something that we need to implement. There is ultimately going to be the need to transition into privatized pensions, privatized plans. If we stay dependent on where we're at right now on Social Security, then people in my age bracket won't receive anything. And so what I'm talking about are folk that are in my age bracket where we begin to transition into more of a personalized plan. But what we have to do now is get this debt crisis under control. And if we reelect our incumbents, you're going to get more of the same. So it's critical that we get the debt crisis under control, and we can do that if you work together with us on August 24th.
Millions of seniors fall victim to Medicare fraud each year, whether it's phony billing schemes, identity theft, or telemarketers that sell products beneficiaries do not need. It is costing taxpayers millions of dollars and driving up our national debt. If elected, what would you do to crack down on Medicare fraud?
Well, I think it's actually probably closer to billions, Ann, that we're wasting right now with Medicare fraud. In fact, there's a book out that's written by a guy named Mr. Frog. It's called Stop Paying the Crooks, and it suggests that, in fact, it's billions of dollars of fraud. By some estimates, 10% of Medicare billing right now is fraud. There is no easy fix. 5 to 7% of Medicare fraud right now may be a consequence of unnecessary procedures. In other words, a doctor may suggest a procedure that's either not done or, in fact, is unnecessary. There are hundreds of procedures that are being reported by doctors on a day in, day out basis. We have credit card transactions which are accurate. We have millions, billions of those every day. We can create the same sort of accuracy if we make systemic changes in Medicare. But I think that fundamentally what has to happen, this fraud is so out of control because there are not prosecutions that take place like they should. There aren't firm, sound penalties out there that tell the people that are out there bilking the government, costing us the services that we need, they aren't getting penalized as they should. They ought to go to jail. If they're going to rip off the government, if they're going to defraud the government, if they're going to take your benefits, then they got to go to jail. I mean, that's the short of it. And so we need to have good, firm criminal prosecutions to clean up this mess. And there are some other systemic things that can be done as well. We're a technologically advanced society. There's no reason why we can't track this fraud in a more effective way.
For more than a decade, doctors who treat Medicare patients have been facing steep pay cuts because of a flawed payment system that threatens seniors' access to their doctors. To date, Congress has been unable to agree on a new system that would pay doctors fairly so they can continue to treat Medicare patients. If elected, what would you do to ensure doctors are adequately paid so seniors can have the peace of mind that they'll be able to find a doctor when they need one?
That's a good question. Right now we're at a point with Obamacare that your Medicare is being cut $500 billion when Obamacare is implemented. That's another cut into Medicare that is a program that's already broke. It's a program that already is paying so little that many doctors do not want to continue to provide services. My perspective is that if Obamacare goes forward, the end result of this is going to be more doctors leaving the field. In fact, by some estimates, 45% of doctors are thinking about either retiring or going into another occupational field because of the impacts of Obamacare. So the first step is to not do Obamacare. And what does that mean? Well, we got to repeal it. Either we repeal it or we defund it. And there's got to be a real commitment to that because otherwise it's going to have even more adverse impacts to those that are most dependent on the healthcare system. I think another real adverse consequence of Obamacare is that we're looking at a situation where you're going to have essentially rationing of care, especially if you end up with a $500 billion cut. You're looking at a situation where people that need the services are not going to get them. Illegal aliens, $118 billion a year, most of that health care. Take care of that problem, you remedy part of this problem. Health savings accounts for the elderly. I think that's a fantastic idea, another way that we can help generate more benefits and better care.
You have time for a brief closing statement.
Well, this nation is at crisis. We need to work together in order to change the direction of this nation. We've got to get out of this insolvency crisis, $130 trillion, unfunded liabilities. The only way we're going to do it is to get new representation. So I ask you to join with me on August 24th and elect new representation in Congress for the state of Alaska. Thank you, and God bless you.
On behalf of AARP Alaska, our thanks to Joe Miller for being part of this video voter guide, and a reminder to all Alaskans, be sure to vote for the candidate of your choice on August 24th.